Okay, so this is going to be just a pretty brief overview of how I set up the lighting and the shading for the clock scene. Now to go into, to show you step by step how I created the shaders and set up the lighting and all. Be a bit too in depth. It's more of a stepping stone for further research on your own. For instance, I'm actually in the middle of doing Grant Warwick's Master in V-Ray workshop at the moment, so I actually use the material of the clock here to learn myself on his approach to creating multi-layered shaders, or GGX shaders, using the tools we have currently in Maxim V-Ray. So that's still an ongoing process for me. So as I say, this will be more of a brief overview. So first thing I want to do is, earlier on, the UV mapping. I said I was going to show you. I've changed around some of the mapping, and I usually do that in a scene like this. As you apply textures and shaders, you might adjust some of the mapping to suit. So for instance, these the bell covers here, I'll just show you. I'll open this up. You can see here I've completely flattened out the UVs. So just put this into perspective, and if we zoom in, you can see I've used this texture here as a bump and a reflection glossiness map to it'll give anisotropic highlights, and any kind of metal like this, or material where you have concentric, in this case rings around the object, it's going to create an anisotropic highlight, which means each of the rings will pick up a specular highlight, and it'll give the illusion then that it's one single highlight shaped the way it's shaped, rather than many smaller highlights making up the whole. So all I did here really was I basically just selected the element, the UV island, and just used this straighten selection, and it just flattened it all out, and then I rotated it to suit the texture. Yeah, I just rotated it here to suit this texture. So that's basically all I did there. Right, so all I have in the background here is just all that is it started as I'll just show you really quickly. It's just like a photo studio sort of backdrop to bounce the global illumination. So it's pretty easy to create. Just create a rectangle and just convert it to an editable spline. Select these two segments, delete them, select this vertex and use the fillet tool just to give you the curvature. You can up the interpolation here just to give you a smoother line, and then it's just I'll just steal this extrude. It's just an extrude modifier, paste it back on there, and that's it basically. Pretty simple. Right, so the lighting here, you can see I've multiple lights and a couple of them turned off. So generally when when you're setting up lights, you're going to try out multiple different lighting scenarios, so you might end up with many lights, and you might turn some on, turn some off, and I don't delete them just in case you might want to add them in or take them away or whatnot. So basically we have we have our V-Ray dome light. Multiplier set very low, and I have a HCRI map plugged in here for the lighting and reflections, and you can see here at the moment it's not affecting diffuse, so I only wanted to generate the reflections. This can also be set up in here You know that usually you could drop this map into for your environment lighting and your environment reflections. Usually turn them off and use the I find you get better results using the dome light. And as I say, you can, it's up to you what kind of look you want. For the final render I wanted a more contrasted, darker kind of look, so I didn't want too much ambient light in the scene. So as I say, I just have that effect in diffuse, and then I have just a V-Ray sphere light with a slight tint, yellowish kind of tint, and that's not affecting reflections, because I only want the reflections to come from the dome light. Same as this is a large V-Ray light. So I played around. I wanted this. I wanted to reflect. It was nice. Those anisotropic highlights, specular highlights I was talking about earlier. This large light here got them pretty nicely. So I left reflections on that. As I say, it's just a trial and error process, and well, not error, because it's, you know, it's down to your personal taste. You want to create the look that you want for your render. So that's basically, you know, how I oh yeah, sorry, there's if I open up the material editor, you'll see here a V-Ray softbox texture here. That's it here. So or V-Ray softbox material. Map, so that's it's just basically giving me you know, some fall off rather than just having a sharp rectangle seen in your reflections, and there's not much, you know, no light fall off at the edges. This V-Ray softbox have some noise on here as well, just to break it up. You can also just use a, you know, hand painted texture, a custom texture here if you want. So that's pretty much it for the lighting. V-Ray camera. The most important, you want to have exposure checked here, and the f number, the f stop, and the shutter speed and the ISO. These three all work together in harmony. So, you know, you drop the f number, it'll give you a stronger depth of field effect, and that's if it's turned on over here, depth of field. The ISO, you know, the lower this is, the less light, but the more noise, or sorry, the less noise. So, you know, around 50 to 100 you'll have very minimal noise, but you'll also have to adjust the shutter speed and the f number then to boost the light. But, you know, that's all fairly in-depth stuff as well. There's some good resources online to learn it, because this is actually a physical camera. It's the same as a camera in the real world, so, you know, it helps to kind of understand the very basics of how a real camera operates, and you'll be able to understand the V-Ray physical camera a lot more. So I didn't really have to worry too much about noise with the ISO here, because I'm using for this render, I'm recently starting to use V-Ray 3 and getting to learn some of the differences with previous V-Ray. So one of the new features I love is you know, it has this progressive rendering mode now, where it just keeps rendering and rendering and rendering, and you don't have to worry about noise, because it's pretty much going to eradicate it the longer you leave it rendering. So I'm not really going to get into all the V-Ray 3 stuff, especially this divide, shade and subdivs checkbox that's been added, because, as I say, I'm still in the process of working on Grant Warwick's Mastering V-Ray workshop, and he's only coming to terms with this himself, and the bloke's an expert using V-Ray, so I'm not going to even attempt to describe any of this as I say, this is just a basic overview of how you might go about lighting a scene like this. So render settings wise, if I was using it adaptive DMC, which I always would have done before progressive, I would uncheck this. It's going to increase the render times, but it's going to produce a much nicer image. So I have 1 in 32. So here, as I say, if you're still on V-Ray 2.4 or below, this is different. The workflow has actually changed with V-Ray 3. So for instance, if I was going to use this, I'd have 1 in 32, 0.8 or even 0.85 adaptive noise threshold, 0.005, and color mapping. This is an important rollout. So exponential, or you can exponential HSV, whichever. You can play with different ones here. It'll just it'll change the tone mapping pretty much on your render. Gamma 2.2, and output clamped here, so pixel mapping, and you want to make sure color mapping only, no gamma. That's if you're using a linear workflow, which I am. GI is brute force, so I'm using that progressive render sampler, so I just have these set to brute force. Set to 8. You can, as I say, I think I'm still playing with the V-Ray 3, but apparently I think you have to drop this down. You can raise your AA subdivisions and drop down the brute force to balance the whole thing out. But as I say, I'm still getting my head around the new workflow in V-Ray 3. So one handy thing to do is to add in these render elements, so that as you're rendering, if you're using adaptive DMC, you can check your different render elements as you go, to see where you might need to add samples. If the lighting is good, there's no noise in the lighting pass, then your lighting is good, so you can lock that off. Same applies to reflection samples in your materials, and lighting as well, GI samples. So it's always great to add these in, so you can check them as you're test rendering and you're trying to fine tune all your render settings. So that's pretty much it for the render settings and the lighting setup. The materials, at the moment, as I say, I'm using this as a test scene myself to try out some of these shader creation techniques that Grant has been going over, which are pretty in depth but also pretty ingenious. So for instance, this material here, I'll just go out to the base of it. It's 3 separate materials layered in a V-Ray blend. So with the base material, and that's I have Fresnel, and this is the key to his workflow for creating accurate kind of reflections that mimic the GGX system, which hopefully I think in the future in V-Ray, it's pretty soon it's going to be implemented. But this method here is Grant's method he's developed, and before, like say for instance, because I'm still testing all these shaders out and how it all works, I just used the bog standard on the side, the body of the clock here. I just used a bog standard kind of a coppery material, which is it just has a V-Ray color. I think it would have had a V-Ray color there in the diffuse, so I just put V-Ray color, and copied whatever the diffuse value I wanted was. And this has Fresnel turned on, quite high IOR for the reflections, and it's just a noise map with some colour variation, because metals will always reflect you know, some of the hue of the diffuse, even though you know it's mostly in reflections. So I don't even know if this is the material, because this would have been set down a bit, been glossy, but in the end, you know, this was let's see if that's, I think that's the material. I'll just have a quick look. Yeah, so it just has a, as I say, a noise, but it's Bearcon noise, but you can just use regular noise set to a fairly high setting, just to give some break up in the reflection. So here's the clock face map material. It's pretty basic. There's same again. There's just a reflection map in there. It's just a desaturated version of the diffuse map, which is dropped into a color correction map, and I'll always use the check on advanced here and just increase the gamma contrast just to darken it slightly. So just have a look at this and see here, I'll always right click out and take off the blur filtering on any map you bring into max. It's always just good habit to zero this out, or 0.01, just right click the spinner. This is just an image I found on Google, and I just clone stamp painted it and messed about with it just to get what I wanted, and then I just used a V-Ray color to bump map and just plugged in that same diffuse map. It gave me pretty decent results. Now this is the shader here that's you can see here. It's the same. It's the same type of shader I was talking about, Grant's shader. The way he has it put together, it's pretty complex. You can see here, it's made up of a top coat, a mid coat, and there's the shader with the all three. So the base material is you know, so you can see here's the layered composite map used in the reflection. So I think it's kind of, it's a bit crazy to try and explain all this, because it's so complex, and I'm still learning it myself. But I would highly advise, if you're interested or serious about learning to render in V-Ray, or to understand V-Ray, or to use V-Ray, to subscribe to Grant's Master in V-Ray workshop. It's fantastic. Like, it really is fantastic. He knows it inside out. But I think that's all I'll show, because it's just an overview, just to give you an idea. As I say, just it's food for thought, really. You can go and explore these things yourself, research them, and study up on them, and practice, and see what results you can kind of come up with. It's all about just, you know, putting the time in, and the research, the practice. So here's the final render I got for the clock. As you can see here, the anisotropic reflections I was talking about, across that texture, that gives that the illusion there of those kind of highlights. Now I went in the final render here, I went for a kind of an old dirty kind of worn, used kind of clock. You can see here where I put the knives. I'll just bring up the material for the glass. Here it is here. So I've just put a fairly large noise map here. Ooh. In the bump, size 20, just to give it a bit of a waver, and you know, so the reflection isn't completely perfect, as if the glass is, you know, distorted. It's old kind of glass. In fact, even newer modern glass can still be warped, and you know, you look at any kind of building, the reflections are generally some sort of warping to them. So I'll just zoom in here. You can see that even you can see this bump has been captured here in the V-Ray colour to bump. It worked quite well. And that's pretty much it. Now you can see, you know, I have done a lot of color correction here. So this was the base render. Now there's a bit of tone mapping done here in Photoshop to this. I exported it as a 16-bit EXR, and it just gives you a much greater range to play with rather than rendering out an 8-bit map. You can just use image adjustments. I'll just come down here, base layer, image adjustments, and then you would use this HDR tone mapping. And I'm not going to do it here because it's going to get rid of the layers, but when you first bring in your render, you can use that and then go from there. So I've added in, you know, these are all fairly subtle effects, but basically they're all just using this plugin which I've used for a long time, and which I really do love it, especially this part here, Color Effects Pro 4. It's been using it for a long time, and you can get some nice effects pretty quickly to boost your render, give it a bit of extra punch. So that's pretty much it, really. I'm sorry I didn't go into depth and show you how to set up everything, but it's the scope is kind of too large for what I'm doing. I was trying to just do this, you know, if other things to have to try and get finished, so I'm kind of pressed for time as well. So hopefully it's been at least helpful in some ways, if not just to give you, you know, a few ideas to jump off from and study some of these things up yourself, you know, see what you can come up with. So alright, thanks for tuning in and sticking with me if you're still watching. Alright, so cheers, good luck.